I was very, I loved hearing what had happened with the fire ceremony and technology and so forth, because we just did a worldwide dance to heal the earth.
Mm.
And part of it was actually physically danced in the Netherlands and in South Africa. And everybody else was at home. And we joined for morning and evening ceremonies on Zoom, pipe ceremony and all that kind of thing. And the dancers stayed connected telepathically throughout the entire dance. It was quite a field, and the energy was incredible. Yeah. I think there's a lot of teachings in that.
Yeah, no, there definitely is. And we've gotten it pretty much all week long. Coyote has really been working overtime. It seems like every single presentation, program, whatever, every single one has had some issues. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, Robin. I mean, it's like, okay, so we just keep going.
Yep. Yep.
So where are you coming to us from? Arizona?
Arizona, a little town called Green Valley below Tucson,
Hmm.
about 40 miles from Nogales, the border. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your connection to water, and then we'll move into what's going on with your water.
I've always had a connection to water, not necessarily as a swimmer. Yeah. I almost drowned when I was 9, and so I've had a healthy respect for water and water's power all my life. Yeah. At the same time, even that incident taught me that water is a living being. Yeah. All these elements are living beings, and they have their own type of intelligence, which is different from ours, but that doesn't make it less valuable. Yeah. In Lakota, of course, they say mini wachoni, water is life. And long before I went to Standing Rock to support there, I knew that water is life. So are the other 3 elements. We can't exist without any of those. Yeah. And yet water is very special because it flows. It's the blood of Mother Earth. It moves things. Yeah. And you all know that I was in that big mudslide in 2014. And of course, being under the mud and the water was another telepathic communication. Mom told me that it was human error that caused that, and that she never wanted that mountain to come down. And she asked me to be a bigger voice for her. And I've never been a political creature. I've never wanted to have anything to do with being public in that kind of way. It's one thing to do ceremonies and facilitate and be with a community that you know and love and knows and loves you. Yeah. It's another thing to put yourself on the front lines and tell you're going to get a lot of flack for that. Right. So when I heard her say to be a bigger voice, I was like, well, what does that mean? And the water said to me, it means you flow. Your voice flows. You don't make things happen. You let spirit speak through you, just like I do. Yeah. So from that point on, that's been my life. It sent me traveling it's been 6 years now. Yeah. And hardly ever at home until COVID. I don't really have a community around my home. Yeah, because I'm not there. But I have a worldwide community that I'm very close to, and water ceremonies are a huge part of that. Everywhere I go, we do water ceremonies. Everywhere I go, we usually do fire and air and earth ceremonies too, but water is always first. Yeah. Um, she's she's a wonderful friend. Yeah. Even in that mudslide and being under mud and water, I mean, I survived. How did I do that? I have no idea. It had to be her that helped me do that. Yeah. The river was blocked for days and there was a huge flood that happened. But that flood cleansed the land in a way that really had needed to happen. Yeah. There was tragedy too. We lost 43 people. And all those relatives had one heck of a process to go through, just like the people who've lost people in these fires. Yeah. We lost a lot of the animals. We had bear cubs. I had a picture of bear cubs in our huge grand spruce tree. And we had 3 deer who visited us every day. We fed them. We had a heron who came to the pond every day. The eagles, there was a pair of, well, actually, there were 3 pairs along that section of river. 3 pairs of eagles nesting. Yeah. And they all went in seconds. So there was also the teaching about the cycles of life and death. Yeah. We all go through them. And one of the things that was a gift out of that for me is that the last few seconds before the wall of mud hit, I knew it was going to hit. I knew I could fight it or I could surrender. So I said to Spirit, okay, if you want me, here I am. Yeah. Being under the water, having the mud come in, all those kinds of things was a death and rebirth. In my tribe, there are 7 different kinds of vision quest. And I went to my Sundance teacher afterwards and said, I just did all 7, okay? And he kind of laughed and said, I think you did. So it was definitely a death and rebirth. At the same time, it cleared everything that went before it. I think that one of the things that water is so important for is cleansing. It cleanses the land. It actually cleanses the water. It will take the smoke away from these big wildfires. It is the complement to fire in that it can put the fire out. Yeah. One of the very few things that can. So, Mini Wachoni, water is life.
Wow, yeah, that's. I hear you, and I agree with you. I like some of what you've said. I never feel like I have one place that I live. I've always been mobile. Um, People say nomadic. I say mobile. But yeah, because I feel like I'm home as long as I'm on the mother. And then those who are my family, I run into wherever I go. And some stay a long time and some don't. But that's also part of the circle, I think. Robin, why do you think the water spared you?
Oh gosh, how do I package that in one little neat ribbon? Part of it was to bring the things out. Okay. 4 times by 4 different medicine men in my life, I've been asked to bring a women's Sundance back. 4 times I said no.
Mm.
I'm not big enough. I don't understand enough of this. I don't have all of this down. Okay. Well, about 3 months after the slide, I got a letter from a woman, a Cherokee elder named Dee Smith, who talked about that there was a dance to heal the earth. It was primarily a woman's dance. It hadn't been danced in so long that they had forgotten the movements, right? The same day, I received a painting from an old friend. He'd seen the painting that came up with me in the mudslide that told us that we were going to be all right, and it was his painting. So he sent me a new painting. It was of a beautiful Indian woman with her shawl out and a feather in her hair, dancing. And it was the colors of the mud. Okay. And there you could tell behind the mud there was blue water, the way that he painted it, right? And there was a red sky. And I thought, wow, what is that red sky? Well, now I know, don't I? Yeah. Wildfires everywhere.
Yeah.
Anyway, I turned the painting over and it said Earth Mother Dancing. And I'd already received the vision of doing this dance. But again, I had thought, okay, well, I'm sure I'm dreaming something for somebody else. Yeah. But when the picture came and the letter came the same day, I said, okay, I surrender again. If this is what you want me to do, if this is part of what I'm here for, I'll do it. Yeah. And I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew that I was supposed to do this. They didn't know what the movements were, right? I had to go to Spirit and say, okay, what do we do? And a little later, I had to go to Spirit and say, I still don't feel big enough to do this by myself. And on top of that, it feels to me like there needs to be, this is partly about the balance of the masculine and the feminine. So who am I supposed to do this with? I don't have a partner, right? Traveling again in Holland, I meet Bert Gunn, who was Talakiello's right-hand man for 23 years in the Sundance in Mexico and ran the Sundance. He knows how to hold a sacred dance, right? Wow, there's my co-chief. Every bit of this has been through prayer. Every bit of this has been through the water because the water is what makes it flow. It's been about emotional release for people, that's water. But it's also been about healing Mother Earth. That means looking at ourselves and saying, who am I and what am I here for? What's my life purpose, my mission? And taking that in prayer to the tree. Yeah. And what I've watched over the last 6 years is that it has totally changed people. And they are ready now to do their part. Yeah. I feel so blessed to be able to facilitate that in some way. Yeah. It's not me, it's Spirit, but Spirit works through me and Bert in that way. And this year it got to be online with dancers all around the world. Wow. What's that about? Yeah. So, yeah, that's part of why that's probably the biggest part of why I'm here. But I'm also here to facilitate other ceremonies because the places where I go, especially when I first went to Europe, people said to me, we don't have any ceremonies anymore. We don't have any culture and tradition. It got taken away with um, the Inquisition, with the World Wars. We don't have any of that. I thought that was kind of weird. So I went out to their ancestors, their trees and the forest and the rivers and the ocean and their one mountain in Holland. It's 900 feet high. That's not even a mountain to me. Anyway, I would make offerings and I would ask their ancestors, and they'd say, just tell them to come and make offerings. We haven't gone anywhere. We're right here. We'll give them everything they need, right? But I had to be the one who could bring a water ceremony to them. And then they could go out and find the rest of the information from their ancestors. Yeah. So that's another part of the reason why I'm here. When I was in my early 30s, maybe my late 20s, but somewhere right around there, one of my elders, a man called Beaver Chief up in Seattle, I wanted to go back and live on the reservation. And he said, don't you dare. You're too soft. They're killing each other in knife fights and gunfights every other night. And that was true in that time. Luckily, that's not quite so true now. Okay. But he told me, he said, you're never going to be a reservation Indian. You grew up in white society. You're a half-blood. It's okay to be a half-blood. What we want you to do is go out and study with other indigenous cultures as well as our own. Because the time is coming when we're going to need people who have a basket of different cultural traditions, different cultural wisdom that they can put together to help people come back together. I didn't understand that either, but I did it. I went and studied with Siberian shaman, the real ones who had never been out of their village before, and they were in their 80s. And I went to the Polynesians. I lived in Hawaii, Maui for 16 years. I went to New Zealand. I went to Australia. I learned from many different people, and I'm still learning. I'm learning from a lot of African people right now. Yeah. Every time that a piece comes, it goes in that basket. I don't know when it's going to be needed until it is. Yeah. And when it is, and I've been blessed enough to receive it, it's there to share so that we can all come. Yeah. We need those old original instructions. You know what I'm talking about, Jim. Yeah. And you too, Maya. We need to reintegrate those throughout our societies. And we don't have a whole lot of time to do it. The elders that used to sit around my table in the 80s and 90s said this was coming, and we would have a definite choice. And if we didn't make the right one, we were very likely to extinct ourselves. And I think we can see that. Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Boy, that's powerful.
I have a question. Can I ask Robin about the basket? That touches me so deeply, and that idea of gathering and gathering experiences, gathering teachings, gathering, and then when the time comes to offer it. And yet right now there's this whole conversation. I just want to ask you about, about cultural appropriation, or you should only stick to your particular lineage or your tribe's traditions. And I understand some people have been very disrespectful in the way they've done this, but I also know I'm of the basket clan. I believe in that. And I just wonder what you might say about that, and say to people who are saying, you know, well, how can you go to Mongolia, and, you know, how can you take things from New Zealand? And I studied with Angelise Arian many years ago, and she was a basket woman who collected from different indigenous cultures. So yeah, I just want to ask your thoughts on that.
In the Pacific Northwest, songs are owned by families. Okay. They don't have copyrights, but they do have ownership. That song has been gifted to them for their use through spirit. If they share the song and tell you that you can give it, yeah, they only ask that you credit their family. Okay. So whenever I give a piece of information or a ceremony that has been gifted to me, in the first place, every elder that I've worked with, I have told them about this basket and why I'm doing this. And so I have their permission to share this. Okay. And when I share it, I always say where it came from. Yeah. That's respect. It is disrespectful to take something that you haven't asked for, haven't been given permission to do, and don't respect the people enough to share where it came from. For me, that's totally cultural appropriation. Yeah. I'm sure you guys remember, I'm not going to name him, but a guy who ran a sweat lodge in Sedona about probably 10 years.
I was there.
Okay, well, there was a journalist who went and contacted everybody that he said he'd studied with. The Native Americans that he got the sweat lodge from said, we only gave it to him for him and his family. He wasn't supposed to be doing this. The South American that he said that he learned fire ceremonies from said, I don't know what he learned from me. I'm not a shaman. The Hawaiians said, we gave him Ho'oponopono for himself. Yeah. So you can see why he ended up where he ended up. And he didn't know the depth of what he needed to be doing. That's why people died.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll add a little piece to that, if I may. I was living in Sedona then, and I was actually asked with a couple other people to come and look at this sweat lodge that had been built before he did his week-long extravaganza. And so we went. And when we went on there, and of course this was fire and water. There was water down there as well. We approached it, and I couldn't get within 50 feet of it. I literally couldn't take another step. I felt everything wrong. I felt everything dark. And so we went to talk with the people who were the stewards of that land. And I spoke the most because I felt it the strongest. And I tried to share that this was not right. It wasn't done right. The energy was wrong. The person leading it was not doing it in a good way. I even saw plastic poking out, so I knew he had lined the inside of it with plastic. No surprise, right? And it was enormous. It would hold 50 people. It was a man and woman who were the caretakers there. And I'm not going to bring in names or anything else. That's irrelevant at this point. But the woman understood, I think, and was asking more. The man abruptly got up and dismissed us and walked out. And so we tried to tell some other people. No one wanted to hear. And then we all know what happened. So my good friend, who was there and had his own lodge up the creek, the day after this happened, he went, and he's the one who took it down and did prayers and tried to help everyone leave who left in a good way. So yeah, that is an absolute, and I still feel it. Just speaking about it now, I can feel the wrongness of that. Now, compared to that, when I started on my journey years ago now, 35 plus years ago, uh, I knew I had Romany Gypsy blood. I had no idea that I had Native American blood. I hadn't done the DNA thing. I didn't do that until about 7 years ago. And so it was a hard road. But my teachers of all cultures, and I would, like you, I went and lived with various cultures. And I was told to go, learn, listen, store the knowledge. We'll need it later. But my teachers also said, Jim, you're to learn these things. You're to learn to do a sweat lodge in one culture, a fire ceremony in another, an awakening ceremony with a third, and so on. Because you will go places, and I'm sure you get this too, and meet with people and join with folks who we never will. That's not our job. We're here, anchoring the land. And so I always tried to honor that. And then all those years later, when I got the DNA, I found out I had Native American blood. Who knew? It didn't matter to me, but suddenly it shifted how some people looked at me, which I found kind of sad.
You know, I was raised as a good little Catholic white girl. My mom was terrified of sharing our Indian heritage. So terrified. She made my dad and me tell people, because we were a lot darker. She was blonde and blue-eyed, even though she had Cherokee blood. She would make us tell people that we were Italian. Probably one of the only things we aren't. So I went back to the res the minute I got out of high school and got married, okay? And started asking to learn. And at first it was kind of like, who is this good little Catholic white girl? What's she doing here, right? And I didn't learn very much because the doors were really closed, yeah? But I chopped a lot of wood. I carried a lot of water. I took a lot of elders to meetings. And at one of those meetings, finally, one of the elders, this is my own tribe, right? Looks at me and says, I know who you are. You look like Auntie Pauline. Well, I should have. She was my aunt. Okay. So once that recognition came, the doors flew open. Yeah. And the ceremonies that they first took me to were for me. I needed to heal a whole bunch of things. Yeah. And I wasn't given permission to do ceremonies overnight. It took years. I had a young woman come to me in Maui a few years ago and say, I want to learn how to do sweat lodge. I said, oh, you do? Cool. So follow me around for the next 10 years. She said, no, I've been in sweat lodges since I was 5 years old. I said, honey, you've been in hippie sweat lodges. That's not what I do. I love hippie sweat lodges, but that's not what I do. I have a tradition I follow. If you want to learn from me, follow me around. It might not be 10 years, it might be 5, but whatever length of time it is, you'll learn what I know. Yeah? She never even showed up. Yeah? People, a lot of people out there want the kind of thing that that particular guy in Sedona was doing. And I mean, he charged $9,000 for that week. Yeah, but that was valuable to them enough that they would give him that kind of money. But they really only wanted the surface. Yeah. It takes a lifetime to learn all this stuff. And it takes following. It's not so much that we're following one particular spiritual path. It's that we're on the road. And if people don't understand what that means, you can't really tell them. You can't explain it to them. Yeah. You just have to do it. A lot of those elders who taught me never said much, if anything. Often they didn't say a word. I just followed them and learned through watching what they were doing. And then they'd say, you do this now. Yeah. And they'd watch me to see if I'd been watching. And if I made a mistake, then some of them, I had a couple of elder women who were really strong, and they would let me have it. Yeah. And that's okay. I understood all that. Another thing about that time and this time, they were opening up to a lot of white people then. Yeah. And many of them did what this guy did. They went to 2 or 3 ceremonies, and then they went out and said, okay, I can do this now. Yeah. And the first thing that happened is that the elders said, no, this is dangerous. And then they also felt their own pain, because that's a wound that people would do that. Yeah. So they closed back down again. Some tribes are really opening up again. They see that this is the time when we have to all come back together. Yeah. Some other tribes are saying, we don't want to let this go. And these people won't treat it properly. So, no. Yeah. And I think it's important that we all be aware of that, because the wound is very deep. It's been happening for more than 500 years now, and it keeps being re-instigated. It's recurring. Yeah. I know that pain too. You know, there are people who come up to me everywhere I go and say, I want to do what you do. Well, great, but they don't really. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's it is like a river. It keeps flowing, and it flows strong at times, and other times there's boulders in the river and we have to move around them, but we keep moving. I know for me, and I'm curious what you think on this, I feel like the knowledge I've been given, um, I feel blessed that I've worked with so many people. When it was going on, I didn't even realize, because for me, it's what I did. I got up, I went to the next, but all this knowledge I just absorb and I put in here. Hopefully, a little wisdom from them rubs off too. Now I feel like the library who needs to give all that back out to the people before I leave. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, I feel that way too. We go through, Black Elk showed us with the medicine wheel that life's a circle from childhood to childhood. Well, I'm on my way back to my next childhood. And
Yes.
then I'm going to transition and go somewhere else. And we aren't here for a real long time. Yeah. So whatever it is that we've received is not meant just for us, ever. I tell people, when you heal something in yourself, it heals the 7 generations and more behind you, and the 7 generations and more yet to come. So everything we do affects everything else. Yeah. And that's a really hard thing for some people to get too.
Yes.
They can't get the cause and effect between
No.
the way we've been living and these wildfires.
Yep.
Yeah.
The wildfires, the floods, the earthquakes, and on and on and on. Yes, the
Yep.
glaciers collapsing, the whole thing. We've broken the sacred hoop, and so that's what we need to heal now.
Yep. Yep. Even the whole, all the people being out of work, this economic
Sure.
stuff, etc. It's all connected. Yeah. It's amazing to me that people don't just get this. You
Yeah,
know?
I know.
I mean, like, I hear denial in somebody, and I'm like, oh man, this is crazy talk.
Yeah.
How can you be in this denial? Yeah.
It is hard to understand in one way. In another way, the fear is so huge. Many people can't look in that mirror. And when you start on this road, that's the first thing you have to learn to do is look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And so I try to get people to do that. Sometimes it's welcomed, and other times I'm not so welcomed. But it's important. You have to see inside yourself before you can look really what's going on. Maya, you're being very, anything coming to you?
A lot, so much. I mean, but I was
I know.
just, we have to learn. I mean, some people are just closed doors and they're there and they're choosing their path. But, finding a way to bridge to them, to help them come out of their fear. I know we had mudslides here too in the Santa Barbara area just 3 years ago. A fire followed by 3
Remember?
mudslides. I had friends that lost their homes. I knew some people that died. And when you try to talk to people about the that there's something righteous about this, or that the elements are responding to what we've done to them, and that we need to see a bigger picture here and how we go forward with our care for the earth and this community. Then they go right to, oh, how dare you say that? People died, and yeah, it's almost like they go into this yeah, just very, that's all that matters. And I struggle with that place of to begin to talk. The elements are alive. The earth is alive. It's responding to us. For those people that just live, yeah, in that fear, and also that fear of death. I mean, our whole culture, the larger sort of Western culture, does not embrace death. Does not talk about it. Pretends that people put it out of their mind. I'm never going to die. And so when it's brought to us, well, now it is being brought to us so hugely with this pandemic, but that we need to understand, yeah, life and death are mixed together. And
Mm-hmm.
so I want to learn to bring that more clearly in a way that touches people's hearts and doesn't feel threatening to them, so they can't open to it.
I think the thing that I've been realizing most in those last few months is that the big conversations we need to have are, what are our common needs? And I don't mean just humanity's common needs.
Yes.
Yeah. Animals need shelter. They need a way to take care of their young. They need all basically the same things that we do.
Water, and that's a big one.
Water, safe earth, yeah, where they're not going to get poisoned. They need fire too, but they need it in a different way than we do. Yeah. All of us have to have air, the breath of spirit. Yeah. Yeah. We need all those things. And of course, us humans also want things like safety, which, in my opinion, can't be given.
Right.
Yeah. The only safety is right here. Father Sky, Mother Earth, me.
That's it.
Yep. And that's present in every moment, but it may not mean that I'd be alive in this body. Yeah. Humans want to have good education for their children. Do we have good education? I've been in Europe where they now have things called sociocratic schools. And those schools, the kids every morning gather together. There's a great big, huge whiteboard. Along the top are all the subjects that are available to study. Along the side are the names of all the kids. And the kids get to decide what they want to study that day. Well, a 5-year-old might want to study geometry. Wow, how's that, right? So they'll assign an 18-year-old who's already studied geometry to work with his child on some kind of project that uses that particular form. Yeah. And the 5-year-old learns, and the 18-year-old learns how to work with a 5-year-old. Wow. Yeah. And one of the things that they can choose is play, but play for them, they've got donkeys, they've got a vegetable garden, organic, yeah. They've got rabbits. So they get to go play with all the animals, and the animals love them, and they love the animals. They get to pick their own salad for lunch. Wow, what a great way to learn. Yeah. Our schools don't do that.
No.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because a lot of these things are being retooled, Robin, by the virus. I was talking to some friends the other day who were in higher education, and they're looking at which colleges and universities are going to fold and which will survive.
Yep.
And some of the ones that'll survive are incorporating things like you're talking about, the way we used to learn.
Yeah.
We used to learn from our elders. We used to learn from our friends, our peers, without that rigid structure that's been imposed and superimposed on education. Yeah, so that's.
You know, in Africa, a couple of years ago, I did a workshop about the wheel of co-creation. And I separated them into small groups to design a project that they'd like to do together, right? And all of a sudden, I heard yelling going on in one of the groups out on the patio. And I'm like, what is going on? So I went out there, and there was a Jewish woman in that group. And the group had decided that they were going to take education into the townships. They were going to build a school. The townships are usually 8 to 20,000 people living in under three pieces of tin. Okay, sometimes families of 10. They're cooking in a central fire. They have a central shower. That's what life is like for them. And the shacks are butted up next to each other. So these people thought they were going to take this education, reading, writing, arithmetic, all the stuff that came from England and Holland and blah, 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 into the township. And they thought they were being the best people they could ever think of being doing this, right? This Jewish woman was yelling at them. Excuse me, I come from a marginalized culture. Don't you dare go in there in missionary position. Wow, raised eyebrows all over the place. What the heck was she talking about, right? So I stepped in and I said, do you understand what she's saying? No. Well, think about missionary position. What does that mean? Somebody's on top, right? So if you go in there without asking them whether they need this kind of education, whether they want it, and if they don't want it, what they could use instead, you're going in as a missionary position. You're going to save them again to make yourselves feel good. They don't need to be saved. Yeah. You need to listen to them before you make a decision about what you're going to do for them. You need to co-create with them. Yeah. boy, did it change that whole thing. Yeah. Changed the whole workshop because the other groups, when the groups came back together and this group talked about what happened, you could see the lights go on. Yeah. We don't know how to do that in modern dominant cultures. It takes some real, as you said, retooling, retraining. Yeah. And part of it is another black elk thing. The 18 inches between the heart and the mind is the farthest distance ever. Yeah. So when we learn how to connect those two and we learn how to be equal with other people, not above or below, yeah, then we can change the world. But until we learn to do that, we can't.
I love that you keep bringing in the Hakasapa black elk. He's my primary spirit teacher. And that came about that's another whole story. But that also reminds us that we have to always check ourselves too, because Black Elk at the end of his life, it's recorded, he spoke about how he had failed because his visions had not come to fruition. And now we see they haven't come to fruition yet. We're watching them now. So any of us working, it can't be ego. It can't be about now because it's time is irrelevant. It'll come when it needs to come, as long as we do the work. And so I've always remembered that because he is such a powerful teacher of mine that we all can sometimes lose track and have to pull ourselves back up in the middle of the road.
Lots of times.
Lots of times, yeah. Sometimes daily, yeah. Wow.
I was thinking about Barbara Marx Hubbard, who also, I caught her in one of her, she just passed last year, but in her later year, standing up in a group and saying how sad she was that she had failed, because she tried a big experiment here in Santa Barbara for 8 years of having core groups and the wheel of co-creation and doing all this. And then, we had to stand up and tell her, no, Barbara, it's like the imaginal cells all went out into the world and now, they're connecting everyone. But again, if she could even see just a year later after she passed, what's happening now, like even with this convergence, it's so, and everywhere I hear people talking about her concepts of co-creation and but yeah, she wasn't here to see that final spark take off.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We give it,
Well,
pass it on.
yeah, and one of the things that happened, I was Barbara's student during most of that, yeah. And one of the things that happened is that she got kind of led off track into this big 2012 party thing that was going to go all around the world. And that wasn't really what needed to happen. There were so many of us that were on the ground already running, and we needed support. Yeah. And Barbara would have given it, except she was being misdirected a bit. Yeah. And allowing it to happen. And there's a lesson in that too. Yeah. How many times in my life have I gotten off track because something challenged me or something interested me or somebody tried to pull me into something else and I just let it happen, even though I knew in my heart I needed to stay on track. Yeah.
Yeah, she got caught up and
Good
tried
advice.
to push the river sometimes. She, I know, I saw her thing, and sometimes she wasn't really embodied, but bless her heart. And that's why I say sometimes we give our gift and it's not complete, but it's the seed for everybody else to then carry it and ground it and anchor it in at the next level. And so I bless her so much, but I saw that too. Sometimes she didn't trust this self-organizing energy that she talked about, but didn't trust it.
Well, aren't we all like that?
Mhm.
One of the things
Oh,
I
yeah.
tell my students is, take whatever I can give you and go way beyond me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really important. We need to add to it as we go along. And that's not ego. That's part of our job. Otherwise, all we're doing is passing down the same information, but we never advance.
Right.
So that's a really, we're coming up on the hour, and I'm just wondering, the one last thing perhaps you can sign off with, and you can add whatever you want to speak. Been doing a lot of work between elders and young people. There's so many young people now asking for the time of elders, to hear the elders. And elders now, I find, are finally listening to the young people too. It's got to go both ways.
Mhm.
What advice would you have around that, or what thoughts would you have around that?
I would say to contact Sue Lennox at Oz Green. Sue and I have known each other for probably 10, 12 years. And Oz Green, her organization, works with youth around the world with elder facilitators to help the youth, and the youth want this,
Mhm.
to help the youth learn how to be leaders in their community and bring their new ideas, their new concepts, yeah, out into the world as leaders. I'm actually going to take a facilitator training this next weekend.
Mm.
Yeah, the 20th, I think it is, something like that. The 23rd through the 25th. So it's in the middle of the week for the facilitator training. I can't talk. Anyway, I've seen what Sue and her group do with youth, and it's fabulous. And she's bringing a lot of indigenous youth from around the world together to
Mhm.
do this training. She's got kids from, well, not kids, youth from
Right.
Hawaii, from New Zealand, and the Aborigines, of course, because she's located in Australia. But she's also got kids from Canada, from Canadian tribes, from America, just regular, not tribal kids. Yeah. And I'm probably going to put another few groups that are working from South Africa and from Europe in with the groups that she's working with now. I think this needs to happen all over the world. We're old enough that we got to start passing the baton.
Yes. Mhm. Absolutely. Well, good.
I can add one thing. The World Wide Web,
Hmm.
they created that for some entirely different purpose. But
Mhm.
look what it's doing for us.
Yes.
We all know there's a World Wide Web that has nothing to do with the internet,
Mhm.
but they are connected.
Yes. Absolutely. I'm asked that often. Actually, some young people will ask me, why didn't you do any of this on the internet? Why did you travel around and spend all those years? Well, there was no internet. and, and I think a mix of both is really important. So, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Robin. This has been amazing.
It has. I loved it.
Yeah, me
I
too.
hope we can do it again sometime.
Yes, let's.
It's so rich, wonderful.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you, sister.
Thank you.